up, Taiwan? I'm Laurel Stewart with news from here in Taiwan and around the world. To crack down on child abuse, the Cabinet wants to put a legal limit on how parents may punish their children. Officials say they'll make sure parents with questions have plenty of resources. But parents' groups worry the wording of the proposal is too vague and open to misuse. John Van Trieste reports.
Attitudes towards the punishment of children in Taiwan have changed sharply in just one generation. The law allows parents to punish children, quote, within the limits of necessity. And many parents these days interpret the limits of necessity a lot more gently than their own parents did.
像我们这个年代都是被打的长大的，觉得小朋友他还是应该要，就是我们要去处罚他，可能画一个格子让他罚站，但我会待在他旁边，我不能不理他。
正向教养，例如说，如果他不吃饭，一直看电视，就是跟他说，吃完饭就是可以吃水果，立刻马上的给他鼓励。
But child abuse remains a social problem often in the news. And the Cabinet wants to set legal limits to how far parents can go. It wants to replace the Civil Code article on punishments for children. The proposed new text urges parents to consider the age and developmental level of the child. And most importantly, it bans any physical or mental violence. It's early days still. The Cabinet has lots of persuading to do to get lawmakers on board with its proposal. But already, different ministries are painting the idea as a step in the right direction.
这个父母亲不是说不能管教小孩，但是我们希望能够用正向的方式。
And they say there are already resources in place for parents with questions about how to do that, from a national hotline to family education centers in each county.
未来政府在这方面呢，应该会扩大相关的这个协助，那并且呢扩大宣导。
But some parents are unsure about the proposal. They worry it strips parents of their right to guide their children's development, and that the wording is too vague.
你的定义很不清楚啊，因为你是任何形式的身心，而且以孩子的感受为主，他要对这个法有正确的解读，避免他引用错误，然后一直制造亲子的对立。
And so, the Cabinet may have even more work to do if it wants its plan to pass with popular support, addressing concerns like these and winning over skeptics. Patrick Chen and John Van Trieste for TaiwanPlus.
People under the age of 16 may no longer be able to use social media in Australia after a new government ban on teen social media use. While the implementation of the blanket ban is at least a year off, many in the country are questioning the move. Chris Gorin reports.
Well, good morning, everyone.
Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese announces a new law that will ban all social media use for Australians under the age of 16.
World-leading action to make sure social media companies meet their social responsibility. Social media is doing harm to our children. And today, as a direct result of our legislation, parents can have a different discussion with their young ones.
The ban would make no exceptions for parental consent and would require social media companies to take reasonable steps to enforce the ban on its users or pay millions of dollars in fines. The ban will not take effect for at least a year. The new law would impact nearly every child in the country. Recent studies show that 98% of Australian 10th graders regularly use at least one social media platform. At the same time, only 33% of parents feel that their children are safe online. Reactions in Australia have been mixed.
I don't think it's a good thing, really, because I think that it's not going to stop it, and also the government's taking control of things that is parents' responsibility.
I think that's a great idea because I found that the social media for kids is not really appropriate.
Australian teens have a different perspective.
Since I struggle with mental health issues like anxiety and depression, I think it would make those a lot worse than they already are. Being autistic, I have a really, really hard time connecting with others, and doing that online makes it a lot easier, a lot less stressful for me.
17-year-old Leonardo Puglisi founded an online news streaming platform when he was just 11 years old. He says the ban could stop many young people from pursuing their passion.
You know, if this ban was in place a few years ago, 16 wouldn't have existed in the first place. We built up our team by having 13, 14, 15-year-olds, people my age, reach out and see us through social media.
Technology companies have been tasked with finding ways to verify users' age without violating their privacy through enforcement trials in the coming months.
It's a fundamental misunderstanding that age assurance is not identity assurance. Identity assurance is where I'm proving that I am Tony. Age assurance is just simply that I am old enough to be able to access something. If you want to go into a shop to buy a gun, you expect to go through some friction about your right to buy a gun.
The Australian law may be the testing lab for the rest of the world, and the sweeping change may reshape how governments and tech companies handle online youth safety moving forward. Joseph Wu and Chris Gorin for TaiwanPlus.
President Lai Ching-te has proposed offering mental health leave for civil servants. His suggestion follows intense scrutiny over work culture in Taiwan's government. That's after a Labour Ministry staffer's recent suicide was attributed to overwork and office bullying. It led to the Labour minister's resignation and sparked similar accusations from other public agencies. President Lai has also pledged to devote more resources to mental health issues across Taiwan. Taiwan's Defense Ministry says 33 Chinese aircraft were seen operating around the country over the last 24 hours. 21 of those planes entered Taiwan's Air Defense Identification Zone. This is not Taiwan's official airspace, but is used as a buffer zone. The military says it has responded to the incursions. The intrusions come ahead of President Lai Ching-te leaving for his first international trip since taking office. A group of Chinese students, faculty, and even Olympic gold medalists visited a Taipei university to foster communication between Taiwanese and Chinese young people. Cadence Quaranta was there.
A group of students and faculty from China's top universities are here at this college in Taipei as part of a 9-day tour for young people from both sides to participate in exchanges. This morning, they joined an event aiming to use music as a form of cross-strait communication with performances from Chinese students. They were invited by former Taiwan President Ma Ying-jeou's foundation and are visiting several Taiwanese universities while they're here. The group includes 6-time table tennis Olympic gold medalist Ma Long. The foundation's CEO has said young people are the future of cross-strait relations, and former President Ma has invested in exchanges between Chinese and Taiwanese young people. He has led delegations of Taiwanese young people to China and said he hopes they will keep in mind their cultural roots. Ma is friendly with China and has advocated for their unification. China claims Taiwan as part of its territory and has vowed to unify it with the mainland, threatening to use force if necessary. China has been trying to gain support from Taiwan's young people, a group that surveys show increasingly identify as Taiwanese rather than Chinese. At this Taipei University, the head of Ma's foundation said he thinks exchanges between young people of the two sides is important.
他们来的时候回去会对他们的同学讲，会对他们的亲朋好友讲，会有更多人想来台湾，这样才是我们想要的两岸交流。
Chinese students said they thought music was a good way to communicate.
我认为呢，音乐是最好的沟通桥梁和语言，因为呢，它是属于全人类的。另外呢，我选这首曲目就希望可以透过我的演奏，透过音符去表达我对这一次出访宝岛台湾的热情期待。
Some Taiwanese students also said they thought fostering communication with Chinese young people was necessary. This first-year college student said this was his first time meeting Chinese students.
我觉得蛮重要，就是因为两岸我感觉，我觉得其实就像刚刚在里面马前总统有讲说，其实最重要的是要有和平的交流。
But he said he was primarily here to get a glimpse of the table tennis star, as were many students here who were holding ping pong paddles and pictures of Ma Long. Regardless of their reasons for being here, today Chinese and Taiwanese students have come together at this college in Taipei. Luffy Lee and Cadence Quaranta for TaiwanPlus.
A growing number of climate experts think China's carbon emissions have already peaked. That's according to a new report by the Center for Research on Energy and Clean Air. But despite the progress, the report also says the world's biggest emitter is not on track to meet its global climate promises. To find out more about the state of China's energy transition, I spoke to Qi Qin, one of the authors of the report.
Your research is showing growing optimism that China's CO2 emissions have already peaked. or they'll peak next year in 2025. Now, that's good news, but you've also found that the country is not on track to reach its CO2 targets in line with the Paris Agreement. Can you just explain this? How is this possible?
Even though that the carbon emissions is peaking in China or close to peaking in China, that coal consumption is still the major energy source in the country. And right now, coal makes up more than half of the country's total energy consumption. And since the COVID pandemic, its growth has sped up significantly. If you look at the chart, you will see that to meet Paris Agreement targets, China's coal consumption would need to have started declining from 2020 in all major scenarios. But what's actually happened is that coal consumption surged in 2021 and again in 2023, well above the average growth rates that we saw before the pandemic, let alone declining. Thanks to the rapid clean energy development, most of China's energy demand growth this year is expected to be met by non-fossil fuel sources. That's why we won't see a big emission increase this year.
China's invested more in renewable energy sources than any other country in the world. What does it need to do to speed up its energy transition?
Yes, as you mentioned, that China has made incredible strides in renewable energy with record-breaking investments and installations in solar and wind power. But at the same time, however, the country's energy consumption is also accelerating, and China is deploying renewables as well as fossil fuels at the same time. So this makes it more of an energy addition rather than a true energy transition. To speed up the transition, I think China needs to take some bold actions. This means first need to control the energy consumption growth in order to shift the economy to a more energy efficient pathways, and also to loosening its reliance on the long-term coal contracts. It also needs to make the grid more flexible so that renewables can play a bigger role. And I think just as importantly, that setting clear and achievable targets for cutting coal consumption and CO2 emissions would also provide a strong signal and a clear roadmap for the change.
At the COP29 summit, we've just seen developed countries pledge $300 billion in climate financing. Despite China being the world's largest emitter of greenhouse gases, it's not one of those contributing countries. What is China doing to support global efforts to tackle the climate crisis?
In the recent COP29, there's been lots of discussion about how much China should contribute financially. But I believe that the most important thing China can do that is to tackle the global climate crisis, is to focus on reducing its own emissions. China is the world's largest greenhouse gas emitter, and also it is the main driver of the emission growth over the past 20 years. So what China does in the next few decades will be absolutely critical in the global fighting against climate change. That's why it's so important for China to take the next step with more ambitious emission reduction targets.
That was Qi-Chin from the Center for Research on Energy and Clean Air. A city councillor in Kaoshiung has been indicted on charges of corruption. Huang Shaoting is accused of falsely claiming about $450,000 in assistant fees. He was released on bail, but is barred from leaving the country and will be monitored electronically. 13 accomplices were also charged, including Huang's wife. Taiwan's hot streak in baseball continues, beating Japan 1-0 at the Under-12 Asian Baseball Championship semi-finals. Taiwan scored its only run of the game in extra innings on a bunt. The team will now face South Korea in the final round on Friday. Taiwan previously lost to South Korea during the group stages 0-1. Thank you for watching What's Up Taiwan. You can visit the TaiwanPlus website or follow our social media for more stories from Taiwan and around the world. Finally, today we leave you with Taiwan's Diablo master, Zhu Chunhe, performing in New York. I'm Laurel Stewart. Take care and see you next time.